Charles Haywood Wykes Sr. was born on March 15, 1858. His father, Edward Samuel Wykes, born in 1833, came over from England on the Adirondack with his siblings and parents, James, William, and Hannah Wykes. They arrived in New York on March 5, 1845. Around 1850, in Ohio, Edward was introduced to photography. According to James Ryder, who instructed him in the making of daguerreotypes, Edward was a good, honest fellow who was obliged to travel 9 miles by horse on poor roads and in winter weather to receive these evening lessons. He was a good student, a careful observer, eager to learn, and he later became quite prominent in his work. Edward married Julia Jones in 1854. Julia was also born in England to Charles Haywood and Caroline Jones. Edward worked as a daguerreotype artist in Columbus, Ohio in 1854 and 1855, and in Mansfield in 1856. Edward and Julia were living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, when Charles Haywood Wykes was born in 1858. According to a newspaper article, Edward came to Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1859, where he opened the most extensive and splendid photography rooms in the state, winning for himself excellent business reputation with the goodwill and favor of his fellow citizens. His manners were quiet and reserved, his deportment gentlemanly and of uncommon kindness of heart. Edward was taking pictures of Union soldiers during the Civil War. He was advised to receive a smallpox vaccination and subsequently died of erysipelas at 29. By that time, Edward and Julia had 2 children, Charles and Carrie, but Carrie did not live much longer. After Edward's death, Julia apparently continued the photography studio until Edward's brother Warren took over a year later. In 1871, at the time of the Chicago fire, Charles was living with his Uncle James and Aunt Mary and their adopted daughter Emma. They were doubly related because James was his father's brother and Mary was his mother's sister. They said Charlie was a very good little boy. Their home was about 5 or 6 miles from where the fire started, and Charles apparently watched the firemen fight the fire a while before he came home. A strong wind was blowing toward them, and the burning shingles continued to set more houses on fire, so Charles climbed up on the roof with a bucket of water to put the fires out. But they finally saw that the house would burn down, and they must leave. A man with a wagon and team offered to haul their furniture out, and he did, but they never heard from him again. Some of their possessions were put in a tunnel, but they were all burned to ashes. Only the iron of Mary's sewing machine and the bands of the trunks remained. Another uncle, Z.P. Macmillan, also a photographer, went to Chicago and back to Galesburg twice to see what became of them. He became Charlie's guardian when Julia died until Charlie was 21, and his son, Cousin Frank, was a great friend. In 1875, Charles attended Lombard College in Galesburg, Illinois. Eventually he traveled with other men on horseback and made his way to Texas, where his grandfather, James William Wykes Sr., and his Uncle James and Aunt Mary were now located.
Charles was introduced to Cynthia Annie Roby by Miss Virginia Ribble. Cynthia Annie Roby, known as Annie, was the oldest daughter of Francis Asbury and Annie Salemnia Bratton Roby. Her mother, Annie, was known as Lady, and she was tall with red hair. She died at 29 when their oldest, Thomas Lewis, was 9. Annie was 7, Elizabeth or Lizzie was not yet 3, and the youngest, Emma, was only a year old. Annie's father, Francis Asbury Roby, was born in Ohio in 1823, but traveled with his family to Illinois via the boat Argus when he was 11 years old. At 23, Francis Asbury, with his parents and a few of his siblings, traveled by covered wagon to Texas, arriving at Brushy Creek on August 18, 1847. It was a difficult trip, ending with a sickness, bilious fever, that some did not survive, and his father wrote that Asbury, as he was called, narrowly escaped the same complaint. He went to California in the gold rush, but soon returned to Texas. He was married to Annie, or Lady, in 1851. His sister-in-law wrote about their wedding that some of the boys bothered him and made him say yea twice. The old parson told him he was double married. He enlisted in the Confederate States Army in 1863 for 6 months and served as a scout. After the death of his wife, and then his mother, Mary, Asbury's father, William Roby, came to live with them. He had a wonderful memory and told many stories of his pioneer days to his grandchildren. William Roby III was born to William Roby II and Jemima Lewis. Both Williams were born in Maryland, Francis Asbury's father William in 1875, and his grandfather William in 1734. His grandfather was killed by Indians around 1780 while locating a homestead in Kentucky. He had a house erected and was about to return for Jemima and his son William at the time of the massacre. Jemima Lewis Roby then married Philip Moore, Jr. on December 10, 1782. This new family traveled on horseback to Pennsylvania and settled in Harrisburg, and then went to Ohio in 1797. William became a keel boatman, and on one trip it is said that he bought a pony and went to visit his old friend Daniel Boone. He also farmed. Before his marriage, he continued to live with the Moore family, and the old stone house was known as the Cradle of Methodism, on account of it being the first meeting house of the Methodists in Ohio. He was married to Mary Polly Collins on October 9, 1807, in Portsmouth, Ohio. William served in Ohio during the War of 1812. William Roby came to Chicago when it was just a frog pond, deciding to stay, but he was stricken with one of his terrific headaches and decided to return to Ohio to settle up his debts, as he said, before he died. Later, when they did leave Ohio, he would not stop at Chicago because he knew it was destined to become a large city, and he liked to fish and hunt. His family, including Francis Asbury, had gone to Illinois by boat, and William came later by horseback across country and joined them there. They raised a crop of corn, sold it, and bought a team of oxen, and started north to the Black Hawk country in the fall of 1834, 2 years after the Black Hawk Wars. Near Kellogg Grove, they met a band of Indians which so frightened the oxen that one broke away and ran all the way back to Dixon. The Robys ended up returning to a spot near the present town of Winslow, where they raised crops and ran Brewster's Ferry across the Pecatonica River for a year or so until 1836, living in Brewster's house nearby. Afterward, William Roby made a claim in Buckeye Township. Of Southern blood, he wrote to a friend that this country was too cold for thin people. Some of William and Mary's married children stayed there in Illinois when William brought his family to Texas. He bought land on Pilot Knob, Travis County, Texas, in 1852. After that, he moved to Cypress. Sometimes the crops were poor, but William killed deer and buffalo and went fishing to his heart's content. At the age of 80, he could slip off a horse and shoot instantly and with true aim to kill a deer or squirrel. He remained active to the end. The day that he fell and hurt his head against the fireplace, he had walked a mile. Francis Asbury's mother, William's wife, Mary, died in 1869, but his father lived to the age of 97 in 1875.
Francis Asbury's oldest daughter, Annie, was united in marriage to Charles Haywood Wykes on February 26, 1880. As a bride, Annie lived in a house on their ranch in Burnett County, Texas, called by her husband the home place. It was a 3-room box home with a hall, and no porch to shelter from the summer sun. 2 brothers by the last name of White first settled this place 3 or 4 years before they came. Annie wrote, "They had the true pioneer spirit. They lived on cornbread and clabber, and saved the butter to sell to help pay for their home. In 1900, the year Charles and Annie's youngest child was born, their home was transformed into a larger 2-story house. Annie wrote of these times. We only had a small farm, but added to it as the years went by. Cattle and horses roamed at will, going miles in any direction. Men on horseback had to round them up in the spring and brand the calves and colts. My husband built the first pasture to hold a saddle horse and team. He called the wrath of the neighbors down on his head for fencing 20 acres of all this vast territory. There were no sheep in this country. They were not tolerated by cattlemen. I think my husband was ignorant of all this because he bought 250 head going out of this county to get them and brought them up to our place. We did not know much about caring for them or what was required. He was raised principally in the city of Chicago. Our sheep shed was not large enough for protection for the weather that was unusual and unexpected. On the 14th and 15th of March, 1880, a slow rain was falling, freezing as it fell. It looked more like a northern winter, with the trees, grass, and everything a mass of ice. No living thing could get a bite of anything green. We had not prepared for the sheep, as grass was supposed to be plentiful. The sheep were trying to keep warm. Consequently, the lambs were all trampled to death. That was such a discouraging blow. We soon decided to sell the sheep and raise cattle. Our first venture in cattle raising was the long-haired kind. We knew no other. It took a pin full to make a pound of butter. The farmers raised corn, cotton, wheat, and some oats. We sent our wheat to distant mills to be ground into flour to make bread. Getting our cotton ginned was a problem. My husband decided to build a small cotton gin, which he did, on Rocky Creek, just above what is known as the Blue Hole. This was built in 1889. The body of water where it is located is known to this day as the Gin Hole. This did not prove a very fast process, but answered the need at the time. This was the most beautiful creek I had ever seen. Large trees, many of them, lined the bank. Burnett County is now considered the healthiest in the state. When we came up, nearly everyone had chills and fever every summer and fall because of the drinking water. We had to use spring water or water dug from wells. This was surface water and contained germs that caused sickness. My husband, I believe, was a pioneer starting to drill wells to get pure water for drinking and household use. Before this time, when we were not near a spring, we had to haul our water in barrels from the creek. Mr. Langford gave the land on which our first school was located, designated to be for school and church. It was primarily Methodist, but was to be used by all denominations. Both the church and school were growing. We had a good school and good teachers. Our community prospered. This was at one time a really and truly Christian community. I heard untold preachers say he spent the happiest time of his life here at Langford. Everybody seemed to be happy. We had singing at different homes and at the school, singing classes with the teachers. We had prayer meeting at different homes. This state of affairs lasted for years. Then dissolution crept in. It is better to cover all with the mantle of charity and forgetfulness. I have faith to believe that all the work that was done here was not in vain. The influence of Christians influenced this life. It is so ordered by the Father above. In 1916, part of the members living in another community decided to withdraw from the Langford Methodist Church. The Chapel Hill Church was organized, and the church was built in 1916. After years of traveling over rough roads, a new era set in. The people got interested in trying to make the roads better for traveling. They turned out with picks, wagons, and team, and plows, and made wonderful improvements. It took hours to go to Lampasas with a wagon and team, or horse and buggy, as the case may be. After the passing of years, cars were coming to view. That made good roads a necessity to make traveling a comfort. My husband bought the first car in Burnett County, a car without rubber tires. Our homes were lighted with kerosene lamps, an improvement over the earlier days when tallow candles were used. Electricity was another forward step for country people. Now we can have lights and refrigerators to keep our food, milk, butter, fruit, and vegetables fresh for some time, add to our enjoyment of life. Then we have radios to give us news of the day and can hear what is going on over the world. We can hear the wonderful sermons by some of the world's best preachers and sacred songs that are an inspiration of better living. Charles and Annie had 9 children, all of whom lived to adulthood with the exception of Roy Roby, who died at 4 months old. Leila May married Edgar Babe Smith in 1904. According to one niece, Aunt Leila was kind to one and all, even animals. Another niece remembers, "She was very kind to us when she knew that any of us children were sick. She would almost always bring over something that she had made, like ice cream." Leslie Lee Wykes married Vivian Bobo in 1908. Of Leslie and Vivian's marriage, this write-up was in the paper. Mr. Wykes is a prosperous young man of the Ocala settlement and is in every way worthy of the heart he has won. Miss Vivian has made her home in Killeen for some time, and possessing a sweet and amiable disposition, has made friends of all whom she has met. Mr. and Mrs. Wykes will reside at Ocala. Eula Lynn married Doc Chamberlain August 29, 1915. Eula and Doc lived in the Dallas area and were very welcoming to their relatives as they visited. As one sister-in-law wrote of her, "Eula is as sweet as she is pretty." Julia Emma married James Oscar Roark on September 6, 1913. As her youngest Wykes niece, I, Reba, remember how much we loved going to the Roarks. They were hospitable. She had a gentleness about her, I thought. I also remember how Uncle Oscar had a warehouse full of stuff. He would take us to his business, and he would say, "Now you pick out something you want. Now I'm serious." Mama found one set of dishes there, and boy was she tickled to have that set of dishes. But I just remember his kindness. It was a very personal way of him expressing hospitality. Elnora Trixie married Frederick Jeremiah Juby on October 18, 1914. Her own journal from 1909 demonstrates her interest in people and events. On July 14th, she wrote, "Just 2 years ago today was a day long to be remembered. It was the last day of the Myers-Harkey meeting when Leslie, Edward, Mildred, Charlie, Maud, Etta, Minnie, Mary, Laura, Charlie were baptized." Edward married Ruby Hine Forbes on August 22, 1920. Edward served our country in World War I and won the turkey shoot year after year at the Veterans of Foreign Wars contest. Annie Mildred married William Jasper Moore on July 22, 1923. Nora wrote of her younger sister on Mildred's 13th birthday. "I gave Mildred her first music lesson today." Nephews and nieces knew her to be quiet and sweet. She lived on a farm in a simple house with a barn and animals. She worked hard at fixing their foods out of what they had. Charles Haywood Wykes Jr. married Tracy Frieda Maharg on July 17, 1938. Charles Jr. studied in Dallas for a while, and when he returned, his father asked him to work on the farm and help him, promising to build a house for him someday in return. Charlie Jr. and Leslie worked together on that house in the 1930s, and Charles Jr. lived there and looked after their mother until her death in 1942. He loved people. He would meet a stranger on the square and pick up a conversation with them.
One of Charles and Annie's oldest grandchildren, Annie Lucille Smith Roundtree, wrote about them. "My grandparents were introduced to each other by Virginia Ribble, who later married Mr. Hall. I always referred to her as Auntie Hall. I was amazed as a child that she was brave enough to call my grandfather by his first name very casually, for he was a serious and formal person. One leg was shorter than the other, making a cane necessary when he walked. We were told that he had the white swelling early in life. I thought later that it must have been polio. Grandfather was not an affectionate grandfather to little children, but I pleased him later when I learned to play the piano well enough to accompany him while he sang. He had a melodious voice and enjoyed singing so much. He would sing several songs, and I was proud to please him. Once he presented me with a box of candy to reward me. He had a wonderful mechanical ability and knew how to repair any farm machinery. Grandmother had lost her mother when she was 8 years old, and she was used to hard work and farm chores. She had been responsible in early life for caring for her little siblings and had very little schooling. She was a lifelong reader, and I was always amazed at her wide knowledge. She had a big medical book that was important in keeping a family healthy. She was deeply Christian and daily studied her Bible. Grandmother had a true love of beauty. One of my early memories is being awakened while it was still dark. She wanted me to get dressed and walk up a lane to a small hill so I could experience the beauty of the dawn. It made a great impression on me. The Wykes family story continues. Let us remember that each of us will leave a legacy. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee.